so grandly situated, as great trunk arteries between two mighty realms, [Footnote: And reminding one of that inscription, so justly admired Paul Richter, which a Russian Tsarina placed on a guide-post near Moscow: "This is the road that leads to Constantinople." And haunted for ever by wars or rumours of wars, decussate, for anything I know to the contrary, absolutely under Joanna's bedroom window. One rolling away to the right, past Monsieur d'Arc's old barn, and the other unaccountably preferring, but there's no disputing about tastes, to sweep round that odious man's odious pigsty to the left. Things being situated as is here laid down, viz., in respect of the decussation, and in respect of Joanna's bedroom, it follows that, if she had dropped her glove by accident from her chamber window into the very bull's-eye of the target in the centre of X, not one of several great potentates could, though all animated by the sincerest desires for the peace of Europe, have possibly come to any clear understanding on the question of whom the glove was meant for. Whence the candid reader perceives at once the necessity for at least 4 bloody wars. Falling, indeed, a little farther, as for instance into the pigsty, the glove could not have furnished to the most peppery prince any shadow of excuse for arming. He would not have had a leg to stand upon in taking such a perverse line of conduct. But if it fell, as by the hypothesis it did, into the one sole point of ground common to 4 kings, it is clear that, instead of no leg to stand upon, 8 separate legs would have had no ground to stand upon, unless by treading on each other's toes. The philosopher, therefore, sees clearly the necessity of a war, and regrets that sometimes nations do not wait for grounds of war so solid. In the circumstances supposed, though the 4 kings might be unable to see their way clearly without the help of gunpowder to any decision upon Joanna's intention, she, poor thing, never could mistake her intentions for a moment. All her love was for France, and therefore any glove she might drop into the quadrivium must be wickedly missent by the post office, if it found its way to any king but the King of France. On whatever side of the border chance had thrown Joanna, the same love to France would have been nurtured. For it is a strange fact, noticed by M. Michelet and others, that the Dukes of Bar and Lorraine had for generations pursued the policy of eternal warfare with France on their account, yet also of eternal amity and league with France in case anybody else presumed to attack her. Let peace settle upon France, and before long you might rely upon seeing the little vixen Lorraine flying at the throat of France. Let Franco be assailed by a formidable enemy, and instantly you saw a Duke of Lorraine or Bar insisting on having his throat cut in support of France, which favour accordingly was cheerfully granted to them in 3 successive battles by the English and by the Turkish Sultan, viz., at Crécy, at Nicopolis, and at Agincourt. This sympathy with France during great eclipses, in those that during ordinary seasons were always teasing her with brawls and guerrilla inroads, strengthened the natural piety to France of those that were confessedly the children of her own house. The outposts of France, as one may call the great frontier provinces, were of all localities the most devoted to the fleur-de-lis. To witness, at any great crisis, the generous devotion to these lilies of the little fiery cousin that in gentler weather was for ever tilting at her breast, could not but fan the zeal of the legitimate daughter; whilst to occupy a post of honour on the frontiers against an old hereditary enemy of France would naturally have stimulated this zeal by a sentiment of martial pride, had there even been no other stimulant to zeal by a sense of danger always threatening, and of hatred always smouldering. That great 4-headed road was a perpetual memento to patriotic ardour. To say, this way lies the road to Paris, and that other way to Aix-la-Chapelle, this to Prague, that to Vienna, nourished the warfare of the heart by daily ministrations of sense. The eye that watched for the gleams of lance or helmet from the hostile frontier, the ear that listened for the groaning of wheels made the high road itself with its relations to centres so remote into a manual of patriotic enmity. The situation, therefore, locally, of Joanna was full of profound suggestions to a heart that listened for the stealthy steps of change and fear that too surely were in motion. But if the place were grand, the times, the burthen of the times, was far more so. The air overhead in its upper chambers were hurtling with the obscure sound, was dark with sullen fermenting of storms that had been gathering for 130 years. The battle of Agincourt in Joanna's childhood had reopened the wounds of France. Crécy and Poitiers, those withering overthrows for the chivalry of France, had been tranquillized by more than half a century, but this resurrection of their trumpet wails made the whole series of battles and endless skirmishes take their stations as parts in one drama. The graves that had closed 60 years ago seemed to fly open in sympathy with the sorrow that echoed their own. The monarchy of France laboured in extremity, rocked and reeled like a ship fighting with the darkness of monsoons. The madness of the poor king, Charles VI, falling in at such a crisis, like the case of women labouring in childbirth during the storming of a city, trebled the awfulness of the time. Even the wild story of the incident which had immediately occasioned the explosion of this madness, the case of a man unknown, gloomy, and perhaps maniacal himself, coming out of a forest at noonday, laying his hand upon the bridle of the king's horse, checking him for a moment to say, "O King, thou art betrayed," and then vanishing, no man knew whither, as he had appeared for no man knew what, fell in with the universal prostration of mind that laid France on her knees as before the slow unweaving of some ancient prophetic doom. The famines, the extraordinary diseases, the insurrections of the peasantry up and down Europe, these were chords struck from the same mysterious harp, but these were transitory chords. There had been others of deeper and more sonorous sound. The termination of the Crusades, the destruction of the Templars, the papal interdicts, the tragedies caused or suffered by the House of Anjou, by the Emperor, these were full of a more permanent significance. But since then the colossal figure of feudalism was seen standing, as it were on tiptoe at Crécy for flight from earth. That was a revolution unparalleled, yet that was a trifle by comparison with the more fearful revolutions that were mining below the church. By her own internal schisms, by the abominable spectacle of a double pope, so that no man, except through political bias, could even guess which was heaven's vicegerent, and which was the creature of hell, she was already rehearsing, as in still earlier forms she had rehearsed, the first rent in her foundations, reserved for the coming century, which no man should ever heal. These were the loftiest peaks of the cloudland in the skies, that to the scientific gazer first caught the colours of the new morning in advance. But the whole vast range alike of sweeping glooms overhead dwelt upon all meditative minds, even those that could not distinguish the altitudes nor decipher the forms. It was, therefore, not her own age alone, as affected by its immediate calamities, that lay with such weight upon Joanna's mind, but her own age, as one section in a vast mysterious drama, unweaving through a century back, and drawing nearer continually to crisis after crisis. Cataracts and rapids were heard roaring ahead, and signs were seen far back, by help of old men's memories, which answered secretly to signs now coming forward on the eye, even as locks answer to keys. It was not wonderful that in such a haunted solitude, with such a haunted heart, Joanna should see angelic visions and hear angelic voices. These voices whispered to her the duty imposed upon herself of delivering France. 5 years she listened to these monitory voices with internal struggles. At length she could resist no longer. Doubt gave way, and she left her home in order to present herself at the Dauphin's court. End of Joan of Arc, Part 1.